Coming to you live from a cabin deep in the heart of the Canadian wilderness. Turn down the lights, get yourself a drink, and let's settle in for tonight's broadcast. Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Mysteries. Here are your hosts.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Midnight Mysteries, the heart of Canadian Paranormal Radio. My name is Nathan, and I'm one of your hosts for tonight.
And my name's Michael. Today, we're talking about ancient giants throughout history. As always, if you want to learn more about these kind of topics, like UFOs, the paranormal, spirituality, and more, click the subscribe button.
Yeah, so what inspired tonight's topic is actually the result of an encounter we had a few months ago where I was with a group in Banff, specifically at the Banff Trading Post, actually, which is a cute little eclectic store. And they actually have this supposed cryptid named the Banff Merman. And it's definitely fake, but it's really fun and kitschy for people to visit. And someone came up to me and said they recognized me. And now I thought it was because I'm a pastor. And when I said, oh, well, you know, I'm a pastor in Edmonton, he's like, no, you're from Midnight Mysteries. And I'm like, we have a fan. We have at least one fan. And my wife comes up and joins us, and he begins to share about how his cousin was part of the special ops team that encountered the Kandahar giant during the invasion of Afghanistan. Now, we'll dive into that specific incident later, but it led to our theme for tonight, which is giants and giants throughout history.
Yes, this is a topic that Nathan and I have gone many years back on. We've been talking about this for over a decade, almost two.
Oh my gosh.
It was really actually the first.
We're so old.
Yeah, the first. Well, at least my first conversation with Nathan about kind of a fringe topic or a weird topic like a paranormal subject or something. It was back in 2008, 2009 somewhere.
Yeah,
we were driving through Alberta, about to go camping, and Nathan just decided to start to talk to me about these things.
Put myself out there. I'm like, this is either going to ruin our friendship or deepen it. And it was actually the topic that got me into the paranormal as well. It was my red pill experience, as it were.
Hold on a minute here. It was more like my red pill experience because you were totally Morpheus in this situation. Like, you sat me down while we were sitting in the car. Didn't have those cool leather chairs, and you're like, here's the
crappy Camry chairs.
Yeah, pretty much. But that was more like my red pill experience.
Well, and it was the first paranormal podcast episode I'd listened to. It was one by Eli Marzulli, and it was an interview on Coast to Coast AM, and he covered Nephilim, giants, and UFOs. And that was really when my eyes were opened up. Okay, there must be more going on than meets the eye. So we're going to be covering giants, but we're going to go a bit deeper too and cover some topics about fallen angels, the Nephilim, and more. And one of the things we talked with this gentleman about is Genesis 6 giants, which is where we get the word Nephilim from. And it's not just the Bible, to be clear. There's all sorts of other ancient texts that we'll touch on briefly, but this is the portion that he brought up. So Genesis 6 says, when man began to multiply in the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives, meaning less marriage and more mate.
Just on that quickly.
Chose. Yeah.
There's some, obviously, like most things, there's some disagreement in the theology around it.
Yes,
but the only other time sons of God in the Bible is mentioned is in direct connection to the angelic.
To angels, yeah.
So it's pretty, you can really assume that they're talking about angels and females.
And why don't we just jump into that really quick? So we'll go through the ancient Hebrew just very, very briefly. And I happen to have some classes in ancient Hebrew and Greek, so definitely know what I'm talking about. But Strong's H1121, or actually, just if you guys are ever interested in looking up the original Hebrew or Greek in old texts, there's a tool called the Blue Letter Bible. But continuing on. So Ben means sons or males, and Elohim means God or divine ones and angels. But together, Ben Elohim means sons of God or angels. And then there's the Hebrew word bath, which means daughter. And then there's Adam, which means, of course, man or mankind. But when they're paired together, it's Bath Adam, which means daughters of men or humanity. And finally, there's the Nephil, which means giants or the Nephilim. And there's actually enough corroborating evidence in other ancient texts, like we mentioned earlier, to support the mythos or history of giants, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, Abrahamic mythology and history, Native American mythology and lore, Babylonian and Enochian history.
Yeah, also Greek mythology.
As
Norse
well.
mythology.
Yeah, and we dive into
over.
those later too. But
even Hinduism. It's
everywhere. And these are from cultures that are completely unrelated and unconnected.
Other sides of the world.
And just so you guys know, we're not just talking about the history of giants, but we'll be diving into some evidence too that have been collected throughout the ages as well. But when we go back to this biblical account, and again, it's not just the Bible, but that's what we're referencing for here. We first see Nimrod, who the Bible describes as Gubar, which was the same word used to describe the Nephilim. In Genesis 10, it also says that he was like a mighty hunter. And side note, this is where the myth of Hercules may find its origin, which is Nimrod's life.
Yeah, another translation. Well, I guess not a translation, but they're also referred to as the men of renown and great warriors.
Yes, like
the Nephilim.
Incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
And we see with Nimrod that he put himself in opposition to the people of the time. And he actually constructed the Tower of Babel in Genesis 11, which another episode we'll have some time. We'll dive into forbidden architecture or forbidden technology throughout history. But they talked about building themselves a great tower with its tops in the heavens, and they wanted to make a name for themselves. Now, the Bible is full of references to these giants, David and Goliath, Goliath's family, the Anakim, Raphaim, Canaanites, the giants in the Promised Land, etc. But again, the Bible isn't the only historical book to address giants throughout history. We can use Semitic language, etymology, and translations of Sumerian specifically, including their tablets, to equate the ancient Mesopotamian gods with the fallen angels. For instance, and a lot of you will have heard this word before, but the Annunaki were cast down because they were underworld deities to the earth.
I bet you most of you heard that from Ancient Aliens on the History Channel.
Aliens.
Yep.
The Anunnaki were also the archetypes for demigods, such as the Greek god Hermes, the Roman god Mercury, and others. And Zachary Sitchin, who proposed the planet Nibiru and a lot of these ancient astronaut theories, has also written immensely about this topic. And according to the main Sumerian creation myth, angels were known under the name Anunnaki or Nanaj, which means the great sons of Anu, and they were the founders of their culture. And it's interesting because the Anunnaki were sons of the Shining Ones, which ties in with what we were talking about in terms of sons of God.
I mean, we'll go into probably have to do a podcast on the angelic and demonic, but I find it interesting that it, in terms of the Nephilim, it only talks about like men of renown and warriors. So like, and it said the angels came down and lusted after women.
Yeah.
So it's kind of implying that the angelic are like some kind of male race or something. Like it seems weird to me. Like it doesn't talk about, female angels lusting after men.
No, it's
right?
very specific.
And it doesn't talk about the offspring being female Nephilim. Just something I noticed. I find it kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, again, it's only translated that particular way. And it's not just translated in one text with textual criticism to back it up, but it's translated in all of these ancient texts as sons of the divine, right, who came to procreate, more forcefully mate, kind of very rapey, with daughters of men.
Yeah.
And the Anunnaki, or the fallen angels, didn't just lust after women, but they wanted to trade forbidden technology for women. And again, we'll save that theme for a different podcast. But all throughout history and mythology, you first encounter these Anunnaki fallen angels who begin to produce children with men. Then they begin to teach men to build weapons, great architectural feats, and then they begin messing with men's DNA. So what about their offspring, the Nephilim or the giants? And we not only can trace horrific giant legends throughout history, like Mike said, but we can trace them right to our very door here in Alberta. And we'll touch on that in a minute. But you have famous people throughout history, too, that had other books of importance written about them because they were these main figures during their time period that also talked about giants, and not just the mythology of giants, but also encountering giants. So one of them is in Gaul in 109 BC, and this was during the Roman Empire, where Consol Marcus Silanus wrote about how his Roman army had set up a camp down in a ravine to try and lure the barbarian Teutons, which was a Germanic force, much like the Vikings, into attacking them. Marcus hadn't believed the stories his centurion scouts had been telling him about the giants that marched with the Teutons, thinking that what they were seeing was the long shadows of men in the twilight. So a very logical person. He tries to think, these soldiers are tired, they're exhausted. Optical illusion in the twilight. But he continues writing about how the Teutons then crested the ridge, and what he saw then changed his life forever. 15, and I quote, 15 feet or taller giants. Their faces were something like from a nightmare, slits for noses and double rows of pointed teeth.
Jeez.
His army was decimated as giants picked up their war horses, ripped them in half, and seemed unbothered by the arrows embedding themselves all over their body. And it's interesting because I've heard people who have, said giants have existed throughout history, but they have, is it giganticism syndrome?
Yeah.
When Andre the Giant.
But those guys are so uncoordinated.
They don't live very long. They've got extreme muscle atrophy. Like, they're not picking up horses and ripping them in half.
I mean, that's supernatural strength, really.
Yeah. And then another example is in 16th century China, where there's rumors about hundreds of giants being part of the emperor's guard. Melchior Nunnez, who's a famous Jesuit priest. By the way, we've referenced Jesuit priests before in other episodes where they encountered Wendigos too. Like, these guys have encountered everything.
I would love to see their historical books.
Yeah, they're just coming from Europe and being simple missionaries and then encountering these things. Anyways. So he traveled and ministered between Japan, China, and India. And he wrote that there were around 500 giants who guarded the emperor, each over 10 feet high.
It's a good bodyguard crew.
Yeah, and this was later confirmed again by another traveler when 70 years later, George Hakewell, in his Apology 1627, issued a similar report. So we've talked a lot about stories concerning giants, but again, it sounds like mythology. It sounds like lore. But where's the proof? Where's the evidence? Where are the bones? And this is where we're going to transition into the history of evidence for giants.
Kind of like the same questions you ask about Sasquatch, right?
Oh, true.
Where are the bones?
Yeah, where are the bones? Exactly. Every time. And surprisingly, there's a pile of it. No pun intended. But let me show you. Romanian giant skeletons, and you can pick this up, but on December 13th, 1976, the Romanian Archaeological and Anthropological Society, and this is in their report, discovered some unusual ancient graves dating back to 3500 BC in Rosia, Montana. When they were excavating these graves, they eventually found these 30-foot tall skeletal remains. What happened to these remains? Unfortunately, communism happened to these remains. For those history majors out there, we know that communism is one of the fiercest defenders of evolution. And I'm not, just to be clear, I'm not attacking evolution right now, but giants and evidence for giants does fly in the face of evolution.
Yeah, it makes me think of, because inevitably we're talking about the cover-up of evidence.
Yeah.
And, you say communism is one of the fiercest defenders of evolution.
Yeah.
And really what you're saying is they're defending what is kind of the generally accepted scientific belief.
Yes,
right?
exactly. The forced narrative.
Yeah.
Right?
And so, for all of a sudden something to come out that completely messes up the theory of evolution, all of
or
that
the
stuff.
Singular theory,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Is, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I know nowadays people talk about scientists like they're gods or something, that they're always right and they always have the best interest of humanity in mind. But let's be honest.
They're inerrant. They're incapable of making
They're
mistakes.
people.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have pride. They
worldviews.
They fall to the lusts of power, to the lusts of greed and money and all those things.
Yeah.
And so it's to defend that theory, I mean, that's what it's all been based on. So I can start to see why would they cover it up, right? This is amazing. Why would they cover it up? Well, it's more than just that, right?
Yeah.
It's this is their livelihood. This is what's been accepted. This is
their work. This is what they've written
everything,
about.
yeah.
And it's interesting because after the discovery was made, the National Party of Romania seized the dig site and executed a number of the workers. One of the survivors, Winter Yu, journaled in his personal memoirs that it was a great travesty to witness the government seize what could have turned history on its head. Exactly like you just said, Mike.
Yeah.
Next, we have a giant femur that was discovered in Turkey during construction work. It was sent and tested. They found a giant femur, not just a regular femur, and they sent it to be tested, and it was found to be distinctly human. The fossil remains in the Mount Blanco Museum in Fossil, Texas. And there's plenty other bones that have been discovered around the world.
So that one's visible now.
That one's as far as this podcast script being written, it's still visible. And again, giant femur.
Yeah.
I couldn't find the measurements as we were putting this together, but there's other bones that have been discovered too that we'll dive into. But for instance, in North America, there are accounts of giants among the First Nations and Viking people groups. There's the Choctaw, who talk about a race of giants in their tribal history that once inhabited the state that is now Tennessee, and with whom their ancestors fought when they arrived in Mississippi in their migration from the west. The giants were said to be cannibals whom the Choctaw killed whenever the opportunity arose. A violent prejudice.
Does the Book of Enoch not talk about them being cannibals as well?
It does, and how they would consume flesh, and even in the Roman Empire's own accounts.
And so there's 3 accounts, completely different from different areas. The Book of Enoch is even referenced in the Bible in some cases, right? This is an old book.
And it's considered, it's part of the Catholic Bible and part of the Ethiopian Christian Church's Bible.
So I mean, that's 2 totally different cultures on parts of the world where they didn't even know each other existed at the time.
With legends that were written around the same time.
There's got to be something
thousands
there.
and tens of thousands of years ago even, right?
Wild.
It's insane. And then there was the Comanches. Chief Rolling Thunder of the Comanches, a tribe from the Great Plains, gave the following account of an ancient race of giants in 1857. He says, innumerable moons ago, a race of men 10 feet high and far more rich and powerful than any white people now living, here inhabited a large range of country extending from the rising to the setting sun. Eventually, the Great Spirit wiped it out, and all that was left of their society were the mounds still visible on the tablelands. And he's, of course, referencing the Nephilim mounds.
Yeah.
And we could talk about flood literature across religions and the world. We'll save that, but that does play into the whole Nephilim conception theory too.
Well, I remember that we contacted that First Nations group here in Alberta, and we had asked them about giants.
Yes.
We were alluding to
We
Sasquatch at the
contacted
time.
a few, actually. Yeah.
But they talked about, in their oral history about giants that they traded with, that they were just
traded women with. And so it's interesting because for those of you who are curious, we went to the Alberta archives, the provincial archives here in Edmonton, and we looked at the earliest maps we could find of the earliest known locations of the different First Nations tribes. And then those are the ones we reached out to around here, Alberta. We contacted 3 or 4, and I think 2 got back to us. But in the oral tradition across these groups, there's legends of giants, including what we just went over. And the Navajo believed that a race of giants endowed with advanced technology dominated the West, enslaved lesser tribes, and that they were extinguished or that they went back to the heavens, which is really fascinating too.
There's another another story up north in Northwest Territories, Nahini Valley, about
Nahini Valley
another
giants,
one of those, this giant group that would dominate people that came through there. So all over the place,
and bottlenecked, and again, I'm overwhelmed with the fact that from the Roman Empire to Jesuit priests to the Chinese emperor to First Nations tribes across the North American continent, not just American, but Canada as well, all talk about giants. And this is where it starts to get really deep. But the Paiutes or Paiutes First Nations, I may be pronouncing that wrong, have an oral tradition that told of red-haired white cannibals about 10 feet tall who lived in or near what is now known as Lovelock Cave in Nevada.
Ginger cannibals.
Yeah, and we'll jump into that in just a second. But human remains have been found there, and a few of the human bones had the marrow removed, suggesting that the marrow was eaten. Here in Canada, the Cree have passed on oral traditions about giants throwing large boulders near the Athabasca Valley. And I know we have some fans who are also in Athabasca as well, so watch out for giants. But the red-haired white cannibal giants. So this is where we get into the Kandahar giant incident. This was during the invasion of Afghanistan.
U.S. invasion,
And there was a patrol out near the mountains beside Kandahar, and they went radio silent. They went static. They went dead. And so there was another group that was sent out there, and this red-haired giant came out from one of the caves, because there's quite the mountain range there and quite a cave system, and started throwing rocks at them, started chasing them down. They attacked it. This is according to one of the special ops soldiers who's interviewed on Coast to Coast and a number of other
Was that the same guy
as well.
Related to...
No. So he talked about a few other survivors that would not come forward because supposedly they brought down this giant with the second squad, and quickly this giant was airlifted out of there to some unknown location. And we know that, with the Romanian government rushing off their giant skeletons that they discovered, which those records are public, like we went through the Romanian Anthropology Society, if you want to look it up. But if one government wants to hide it, then it's not a far stretch to believe that other governments may want to hide it. So the cousin of this man who recognized me from Midnight Mysteries in Banff was supposedly part of this special ops team, the second special ops team that brought down this giant. But they all described this giant as having red hair, being a pale white, and having double rows of teeth. So, there's a number of other podcasters who have covered the Kandahar giant too. Stephen Quayle, Eller Marzulli. Again, this was part of our Red Pill experience into the paranormal. So what about evidence for giants here in North America? There's a lot. So much so that there's a book called The Encyclopedia of Ancient Giants in North America. And we have a PDF copy if anyone wants it, but I suggest you supporting the author, because at one point it was circulated in academic groups, but then it's not taken as seriously anymore just because he says giants used to exist here. Anyways, essentially it chronicles not stories, but reported and collected giant skeletons. We're going to read a few records where giant bones were discovered here in North America. And by the way, you can look up these original articles in the Smithsonian Institute's regional report. So the first one is the San Diego Giant, and this is on October 7th, 1985. Just over 9 feet tall, this report says, this giant skeleton was found in a cave by prospectors near San Diego, California. It was displayed at the Atlantic Exposition and then purchased by the Smithsonian Institute. And then in Salina, Kansas, there was what's nicknamed a Nephilim burial pit. 27 skeletons were unearthed in a mound by an archaeologist in Salina, Kansas. These skeletons started at 7 feet and were as tall as 12 feet. The Indian burial pit was covered and sealed with concrete by the state of Kansas, at the insistence of the Pawnee Indians of Oklahoma in 1990. Next, in 1931, the federal WPA archaeological team, digging in association with the University of Texas, discovered a skull of, and I quote, a giant being in Victoria County, Texas. This skull that was found to be twice the size of a normal human skull, putting the rest of the skeleton at 12 to 15 feet. Guys,
big.
these aren't random blog posts on the internet. This is a university in Texas, the University of Texas. This is the federal WPA archaeological team. These are serious ball players talking about giants and giant skeletons. The San Antonio Express covered this story, as well as other major newspapers at the time. The skull was donated to the Smithsonian Institute, and
convenient.
we're gonna jump down to and we could post this page later. But one of the studies performed on a number of the skulls. The Scientific American published this paper in 1862, stating that with each one of these skulls, from California to Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, each of these giant skulls had double rows of teeth. Therefore, again, just saying it's not giganticism syndrome. Yeah. We know that most, if not all, of these bones were examined and studied. So what happened? Where are these bones now? Well, it's really strange because most of these skeletons, and we're talking about thousands of skeletons, were donated to the Smithsonian Institute. Now, up until the early 1900s, the Smithsonian had been publishing their finds about giant skeletons. For instance, November 18th, 1897, page 3 of the Smithsonian Institute Division of Ethnology, the paper says that it is officially recording the ancients of the Bureau of Ethnology, and they've explored more than 2,000 of these mounds, and that they believe it is a matter of official record that in digging through a mound in Iowa, the scientists found that found the skeletons of giants who, judging from actual measurement, must have stood between 7 to 30 feet when alive.
Random point story. Book of Enoch talks about one being like 300 to 400 feet tall. Like,
insane.
I can't even imagine that. And that maybe Enoch was embellishing a little bit there, but that's wow.
But the point is, these aren't NBA players, right? These are like massive.
It's not like, wow, that guy drank a lot of milk when he was a kid. No.
On October 7th, 1895, the Smithsonian Institute says, and I quote, "As to the accuracy in the estimate, there can be no question, as a cadaver that has been carefully inspected and measured by Professor Thomas Wilson, curator of the Department of Prehistoric Anthropology in the Smithsonian Institution, and other scientists, says it is an inhumane giant skeleton."
Yeah.
So, why did they stop displaying the giants? Why did they stop acknowledging and even denying their existence?
Well, yeah, let's dig into that. Like,
Sure.
what are some possible reasons? I mean, there's the general move from a spiritual worldview to a very materialistic worldview.
Yeah.
There's, whereas ancient views were much more open to the spiritual, to the supernatural. Now it was
like
science. physical only.
Pre the Age of Enlightenment, and it seems to be distinctly Western philosophy that stopped being open-minded
Right.
to any of this stuff. But in the early 1900s, which was the beginning of the Age of Enlightenment, North America started taking small steps away from a spiritual worldview, like Mike mentioned, towards a scientific worldview. Academic institutions started teaching that there isn't more to life than this, that we're the result of chance, that there's no greater purpose, there's nothing beyond our own dimensions. And to say there are giants means that they also have to admit that, you know, something supernatural in the literal sense of the word and possibly even spiritual exists too. And that completely demolishes life coming to exist by chance.
Well, yeah, and I mean that, like we talked about earlier with communism, and it completely changes the worldview. And, you know, if you really want to go down the spiritual rabbit hole, you can talk about the fallen angels and their, how should we say it, their influence on mankind, especially the ruling elite, which people call many things nowadays, but
and
you know,
where they're at today, right?
Yeah.
What their influence might be today.
Well, right, they didn't just disappear.
No.
They're, you know, they're not gone.
These are, in these ancient texts, these are post-flood beings as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's we could talk about ancient technology with these beings. We could talk about how they set themselves up behind ancient governments as demigods. But I think what we really just want to cover in the last few minutes is that, you know, it demolishes the sense that there's something else beyond what we are, what we're created for. And we're not getting religious here per se, but when you talk about evolution, strictly evolution, and I'm not bashing people who believe in evolution at all, but the traditional evolution viewpoint is that we have some sort of prehistoric ancestors that were part human, part not human. They were kind of closer and closer related to apes. Now, a lot of times people say, "Oh, evolution believes we, you know, descended from apes," but it's more of the belief that we descended from a distant relative. But how do you mix giants in with that? Like, where do they fit?
Especially a race of giants that was more advanced than the regular humans at the time, right?
From the First Nations tribes, the many First Nations tribes of whom we covered a bunch of tonight, they talk about these beings having technology they couldn't fathom, to the ancient accounts in the Middle Eastern societies, completely unrelated, also talking about these beings having technology, to the Greek cultures that talked about, you know, these beings having ancient technology. And so it's, you can't take one without the other, in my opinion.
Well, and evolution would suggest that if one of these races was more advanced, bigger, stronger, smarter, basically they had the lead in everything.
Yes, absolutely.
They would be the ones to survive.
Yeah.
You know, obviously in a lot of these cultures, they talk about the Great Spirit wiping them out. Obviously, something greater than them wiped them out.
And it talks about these beings being the sons of this one God. Yeah. Right. And again, not in the literal sense that this God physically bore them, but were rather creation of another realm. Yeah. And any final comments for
so many ways you could go with it, but we'll have to.
We covered
pick it apart.
A lot of content tonight. I know we talked about being more of a conversational podcast, so please don't expect this much content and in-depth topics regularly. But again, this is one of the topics Mike and I have talked about for years. Yeah. So any final thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I just want to put it out there. You know, we're not anti-science or anything like that.
Not at all.
Like
100%.
It's we believe all of it plays a role, but there's definitely
we just don't believe science can stand strictly on its own.
Yeah. There's a whole lot of things that play into, yes, there's a lot of these things are myths, but where do myths come from,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If you have multiple cultures and groups of people,
Unconnected.
religious beliefs from around the world across tens of thousands of years
Yeah.
that say the same thing, there has to be a root that it's coming
Yeah.
from.
Especially when these cultures have all sorts of other beliefs that aren't connected in any way,
Yeah.
shape, or form. You have to really pay attention to all of a sudden they all specifically talk about the same thing
Yeah.
with the same characteristics and features.
It's not just giants. It's like
No.
there's actual specific details,
Double
like
rows
the
of
teeth, yeah,
red hair.
cannibals,
Yeah, crazy tall.
yeah. So there's something there, and there's so much more to go into. We'll probably have to do another episode.
Yeah. Actually, I wouldn't mind doing a part 2 episode. So,
Yeah.
cool. I think that about wraps up our time for today. We talked about, giants in mythology and in ancient belief systems. We talked about evidence for giants, both in the historical sense of unconnected cultures. And then we talked about evidence. I mean, I'm still overwhelmed with the fact that the Smithsonian, one of the greatest museums for the display of history, used to collect these things.
Yeah.
They've collected thousands, and then all of a
Now they're
sudden,
gone.
and guys, again, this isn't just random people talking about the Smithsonian collecting these things. It's in the Smithsonian's own documentation. We talked about, how giants are not separate from spirituality, because we addressed ancient technology and forbidden architecture, and we'll get more into that in a later episode. But we appreciate you guys tuning in. Sorry, I need to bring some water next
Getting all
time.
choked up.
Thanks for joining us. Do you or someone else ever witness a giant skeleton or come across giant skeletal parts? Leave your thoughts and comments below, and we'll see you next time on Midnight Mysteries.
Have a good weekend.
Bye-bye.